And we are live with another episode of the Team Rivalry Show, and immediately we're having technical issues because I sound very much like I am in a room. I gotta get better sound. I gotta get like acoustic treatments or something in here. There we go. That'll probably help. Oh, having the window open doesn't help either though, but it's such a beautiful day out. Why would I close it? My goodness, it's gorgeous. We're finally getting into some fall weather. This is the absolute best time of the year. Normally, I like the fall or the colder weather to come, more in September when it's supposed to come here in Michigan. But that's fine. It wasn't like it was 85 degrees. What, Sunday or Monday? No, I think the highest it got up to is actually like 77. I'm kind of bitter about it. I don't like warm weather in October. Let's just put it that way. I feel like that's fair. Isn't that fair? Is that not fair? I don't know. I don't care. Anyway, hello everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Team Rivalry Show. My name is Mackenzie. I will be your host. We didn't have a show last week, so if you didn't see it, you're not crazy. Yours truly had a birthday. That's right. I have spent a full 27 years on this planet now. I know I don't look it. I could be easily pushing 26. But I'm at 23 now. That was a little loud. I'm gonna turn my headphones down. Hopefully the stream's not too loud. Sound check. I think we should be good. Actually, it looks like it's a little low. I'll turn it up. So it would be nice if we could get somebody in the audience to tell me whether or not the audio is good or bad. But we'll get there. We're growing. I mean, that's what it is we're growing. It's a growing channel. You gotta start somewhere, right? So we're starting here. All right, lots to get to. Goodness gracious, what a week 5 that was. That was a bit crazy, wasn't it? Gonna look at we're gonna recap week 5, which I guess was actually week 6, but that's fine. How about Alabama going down to Texas A&M, coming up with Texas A&M coming up with a huge game last week. That was awesome. I'm still trying to get all this ready to go. I forgot. I'm sorry. And there's the train. Gotta love it. You gotta love it. All right. Yeah, so starting things off. The name of the channel or the name of the video. Stop playing. There we go. Jeez. Name of the video has what I want to talk about. So mid-season grades for all Big Ten teams. So I'm just going to dive right in. We're going to talk some Big Ten football and see where all the teams stand at this point. So I've got some stats over here that I'm looking at. That's why I'm looking over there and not directly in front of me. And then when we get to calling the games for next week, there we go. I'll look over here. That's where I'll look. And then I'll put this back over here so that I can keep an eye on the stream, make sure everything's going okay. Boom. All right. So we're just going to go through each Big Ten team and kind of look at how they're doing, give them some grades, see what they're up to these days. We'll start with Illinois Fighting Illini. I give them a D. I think that's pretty easy, frankly. Diving into them just a little bit because, I mean, this is kind of dumb, right? Does anybody remember, what was it, week 0? I'm just going to bring this closer. Week 0, Illinois beating Nebraska. Does anybody remember that? That's kind of crazy, isn't it? That's kind of a crazy thing that happened literally just this year. Since then, the Fighting Illini lost to the University of Texas San Antonio, the University of Virginia by a lot, 42-14. They lost to Maryland. Maryland's actually doing okay, but obviously we all saw what happened against Iowa, so there's that. They lost to Purdue. Purdue's whatever. They beat Charlotte, but they only beat them by 10 points. And then they got shut out at home by Wisconsin. Grabbing a sip of tea. Can anyone tell I'm biased? Anyway. Things not looking good for the Fighting Illini. Definitely not in Brett Bielema's first year. That's for sure. I think everyone... It's kind of funny how narratives change from week 0 to week whatever we're in now to week 6. because thinking about like right before the season began, Illinois was obviously not expected to do very well. It was kind of, I thought anyway, it was kind of a question mark whether or not Brett Bielema was going to make Illinois, I guess, relevant by Illinois standards. I mean, they beat Wisconsin 2 years ago. What was it? Something like that. Wisconsin was undefeated at that point, and they were looking good too. Not so much this year, but they were looking good then. So I guess for me, it was kind of a question mark. Like, Brett Bielema had some success with Wisconsin in the Big Ten. Goodness, can't speak. So what was he going to be able to do with Illinois? Now, Illinois to me is one of those programs that's a lot like, Minnesota. They're a lot like the Detroit Lions. That's what they're like. They've got talent on that team, but they're never going to take it anywhere. Illinois is kind of the same way for me. They've got some talent. I believe Brandon Peters is still their quarterback. Is that right? I can't remember exactly. But, like, Illinois to me is that team that constantly has, like, they have players on their team that can do special things. They just can't ever turn it into anything. And whether that's the coaching staff, whether that's because they don't have enough players, whether that's because their defense constantly screws things up, they haven't had a strong defense in, recent memory at this point. So what was Brett Bielema going to be able to do? It was kind of a question mark. And he opens the season with a 30-22 victory against Nebraska. Yeah, it came at home, but it was Nebraska. Think about what Nebraska's doing now. Nebraska, close loss to Oklahoma, close loss to Michigan State, close loss to Michigan. Nebraska is doing some crazy, crazy cool things, and they are, a lot of people are saying that they are the best 3 and 4 team in the nation at this point. And I'm inclined to agree with that. And I'll get to Nebraska in a little bit because my heart bleeds for Scott Frost. Just bleeds for him and Adrian Martinez. They deserve so much better. And they'll get there. All right, I'll get to them in a minute. But Illinois, the question mark was Brett Bielema going to do anything in his first year? And I feel like right after that first game, Illini Nation was like, oh my goodness, something's going to happen. Something great is going to happen. We've got this new coach is coming in here, and he's immediately changed the program. Illinois was 1-0 at one point. Illinois was undefeated after a week of football during this season. Now, I get it didn't last long. That's fine. Whatever. The fact that it happened at all is kind of a huge thing for Illinois. So you got to think that around Champaign, people were like, oh my goodness, maybe Illinois is going to be something this year. And then to immediately lose to a team, University of Texas San Antonio is not good. They're not good. They probably felt pretty good after beating a Big Ten team. I get it's Illinois, but whatever. Oh my goodness, I have to take that back, like, immediately. That's kind of funny. So interestingly enough, UTSA is actually 6-0. So I immediately ate crow there. That's fine. I don't mind. I will admit when I've eaten crow. They still haven't played anybody. They played Illinois. That's fine. They beat somebody called Louisiana A&M, maybe? I don't know. Middle Tennessee, Memphis. Memphis was good at one point. UNLV, Western Kentucky. Western Kentucky's got a great offense. Absolutely nothing on defense, that's for sure. But University of Texas San Antonio, 6-0. Maybe I got to give Illinois that one. Maybe that, you lost to a 6-0 team. That's sure a heck of a lot better than losing to a 3-4 team in Nebraska. But again, we're looking at Nebraska in a bit, and they're a lot better than I think their record says. Maybe, at that point you got to wonder, maybe Illinois better than what their record says? Because then the very next game was a loss to Virginia. Virginia's, I feel like they're probably average. Usually in terms of college football, I think that they're generally an average team. They'll beat the bad teams, but they don't generally win against the good teams. I think who'd they beat? They beat, was it Miami? Miami that one game? They're both in the ACC, I think, so I can't remember exactly. But anyway, and then Illinois comes home and plays Maryland. Maryland, obviously, with, what's his name, Talia Tagovailoa? Saw a funny quote on YouTube after the Iowa game that he should change his name to Talia Tagovailoa. It's mean. but whatever. It's funny. Yeah, so I mean, Maryland, good offense. Illinois just didn't have enough. And then Purdue, I don't understand that. Purdue was 3-1 when they played Illinois. Purdue is now 3-2. So, you know, they had a close game against Notre Dame, but then they lost to Minnesota, who obviously lost to a low-level MAC team, and there's just no reason to look at any other part of Minnesota's resume. So it doesn't matter. As soon as you lose to, wasn't that Miami of Ohio? They were favored by 50-some-odd points, and they lost. As soon as that happens, the rest of your season's irrelevant, man. I don't care if you go on to win anything. I don't care who you go on to beat. Unless Minnesota then goes on to beat, well, they already played Ohio State, so that's out the door. Man, we're going way out of order here. So that's the Fighting Illini. They've got some work to do. Brett Bielema's definitely got some work to do. I stick with the D grade I give them. Maybe I'll give them a D plus just because they beat Nebraska before Nebraska got going. All right, grabbing a quick sip. Hello to everybody in the chat. Go Blue. I see you there. Okay, so Indiana. 2-3 Indiana Hoosiers. Let me get in the, what is it called? The way back machine. The Wayback Machine. Mr. Peabody and Sherman. That's what it is. Let's get in the Wayback Machine a second, and let's talk some Indiana Hoosiers 2020 football. Let's talk about how they were on the verge of making the Big Ten championship game over Ohio State. And now they are 2-3, 1 year removed. I don't know who they lost on defense because, admittedly, I don't pay a ton of attention to Indiana. But they lost some people on defense, apparently, because they're giving up some seriously bad numbers. They were leading against Cincinnati at one point, quite significantly, I remember. I remember actually being disappointed for Cincinnati because I was like, Indiana's already lost a blowout to Iowa. I'm not saying they were meant to win that game against Iowa. I'm just saying it shouldn't have been a blowout if they thought the rest of their season was going to be worth anything. Of course, don't tell Nebraska that it's if you lose your first game, the rest of your season's not worth anything, because they're playing literally everybody as if they're on the verge of winning a championship. You just can't fumble the ball. Yeah, Iowa, the Iowa game, that was a blowout. They beat Idaho 56-14. That's fine. And then they led for most of the game against Cincinnati, but then Cincinnati turned it back on. That's why I think Cincinnati's actually a real team. What do I mean by a real team? I think that they've got it where it counts. You know, the really good teams, maybe not the elite teams. I think elite teams take control and then don't let up throughout the rest of the game. But the really good teams come back when they're punched in the mouth. And Cincinnati was legitimately punched in the mouth by Indiana in that game. I think at one point Indiana actually led by something like 2 or 3 scores at one point. Yeah, so it was Indiana was at like 17-10. It was a 14-0 game at one point, and then the first half ended 14-10. And then third quarter, Cincinnati came back and took the lead, 17-14. But then Indiana came back and took the lead again, 21-17. And then Cincinnati punched them right back. That's what you're supposed to do when you hit adversity like that. Now, that's the difference between Cincinnati and Indiana at this point, is that Cincinnati had the means to punch back. Indiana didn't. All right, we're spending too much time on Indiana. Western Kentucky, they beat them by 2 points. I just said Western Kentucky has a good offense. Indiana clearly didn't have an answer for that on defense. The thing that boggles my mind, though, is this 24-0 loss against Penn State. And maybe that's just I'm not quite there with Penn State. I know everybody's like, Penn State's elite. They're the best chance at dethroning Ohio State this season. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that actually the best chance at dethroning Ohio State as Big Ten champion is Iowa. I think probably everyone else agrees with that too. But I think if you're just looking at the Big Ten East, then you're kind of back and forth between Penn State and Michigan. Maybe Michigan State if they keep winning. But for right now, I'm kind of looking between Penn State and Michigan. And Penn State, with this dominating victory over Indiana, which was very much a revenge game for them, there's that factor to play on top of it too. Yeah, I think Indiana's really got some problems, especially on offense. All of a sudden, honestly. So that said, I mean, Indiana 2-3, 6th in the Big Ten East after 5 games. They're probably not too thrilled about what's been going on down there in Bloomington, so I'm gonna give them a D as well. Up next, Iowa Hawkeyes. Let's just quickly go through the rest of these. I got some other stuff to get to before the end of the stream. Okay. Iowa 6-0, top of the list in the Big Ten West. Impressive stuff. They beat Indiana while Indiana was still relevant, which obviously means it wasn't even well into the season yet. They then went to Iowa State and beat them 27-17. Excuse me. I think that was a win that not a lot of people saw coming. I think that was actually a really interesting win. I think that's when everybody kind of looked at Iowa and said, "Oh, okay, maybe there's something into this Iowa team now." But what I kept seeing was I saw turnovers, and I see a defense that can obviously get turnovers for sure. What I struggle with though is whether or not, so Iowa State had 4 turnovers in that game. That's crazy. Actually, now let me read you this real quick before I keep going. So the opening line was Iowa State by 4. Total yards: Iowa State 339, Iowa 173. 173. First downs: Iowa State 21, Iowa 11. And yet, who won this game? Is honestly looking at these stats and then looking at the final score, it's like Iowa State was the little brother that just kept running around, bouncing off the walls, doing, all sorts of trying to do somersaults and all sorts of fancy things and stuff like that, and then just kept hitting their head against the wall and knocking themselves out for a minute, and then Iowa would just come over and steal their lunch money. I don't know how many brothers steal their little brother's lunch money, but you get the idea. I mean, Iowa was just sitting back and waiting for Iowa State to make a mistake, and then boom. Iowa's got the ball. Iowa scores the touchdown. That's, decent enough game plan. The question is how sustainable is that model? I mean, how many teams can Iowa just sit back and wait for them to make a mistake and then take advantage of that mistake? Because they're obviously taking advantage of mistakes for sure. They did that against Kent State. They did that against Colorado State, against Maryland for sure. Goodness gracious. Talia Tagovailoa had 6 interceptions in that game, I think. Man, the last time I saw a game with that many interceptions was Denard Robinson when he played for Michigan. I think it was Hokies last year, 2014, right? And at Notre Dame. That was actually my first semester at Western Michigan. I remember sitting at a Buffalo Wild Wings in Kalamazoo, Michigan, watching that game 31-0. It was the first shutout of my lifetime of Michigan football, pretty sure anyway. And I remember just sitting there and talking Western Michigan football with some guy at the bar and watching this game. I was happy that I was old enough to drink. Let's put it that way. I didn't get wasted or anything. Iowa beat Penn State. Epic fourth quarter comeback to do that. Didn't have to come back by much. But they did score 10 points in the fourth quarter to come back and do that. I believe at one point, at the end of the first quarter, it was Penn State 14-3. And I remember looking at that score thinking, man, I really wish I hadn't put – I've been getting into sports betting. Really, really minimal stuff. I put $1 down on Iowa, and then I saw Penn State was up 14-3 at the end of the first quarter, and I was just like, oh, wow, okay. Well, that was a well-spent dollar, I guess. And then I ended up watching the last like 5 minutes or something, and I just the score on ESPN's app, and to see to see Iowa come back, that was just an epic comeback. So Iowa's getting an A from me, an A minus actually, and an A minus. The reason for that is because they're winning the turnover battle. And I think that they're doing it purposefully. I mean, I think that it's obvious that they're really good at getting those turnovers. I think that the issue is, what happens if they come up against a team that doesn't really turn the ball over very much? Ohio State, I don't think, is a good example of that, because I think C.J. Stroud has thrown a couple of really bad interceptions. I think they've also lost a couple of fumbles, if I'm not mistaken. So Iowa's looking good. A minus from me. Maryland Terrapins. Goodness gracious, they're 4-2. They had an awesome season-opening win against West Virginia. Destroyed Howard 62-0. Beat Illinois 20-17. Beat Kent State, and now have lost 2 straight. Now, who have they lost 2 straight against? Iowa and Ohio State. Why would you schedule like that? In what universe? I don't care when these games were scheduled, because a lot of times games get scheduled, several years in advance. I remember Michigan announced that they scheduled a home-and-home series with Texas, I think in the 2030s. I am going to be, pushing 40? I'm going to be like 36, 37. Whatever, math wasn't my major. When Michigan plays Texas, that home-and-home series that they announced years ago. They announced that like 5 or 6 years ago. And yeah, but it's Texas. But so Maryland scheduling these games, whether it was 5 years ago, whether it was 10 years ago, whether it was 15 years ago, I don't know in what universe that you look at putting Iowa and Ohio State back to back like that. That's just setting your team up for failure. And admittedly, I have no idea how much control they have over this. I don't know if Maryland needs to go to the Big Ten and say like, oh man, Maryland wasn't in the Big Ten until like 2013, 2014. So whatever. At some point, that makes it worse then. So Maryland came into the Big Ten, and within a couple of years had a couple of back-to-back games scheduled against Iowa and Ohio State. I don't care how either of those teams are doing. You don't do that. Well, that was a whole lot about a dumb scheduling issue. Whatever. They lost to Iowa 51-14. Bad loss. And then followed that up with a 66-17 loss against Ohio State. So Maryland's going to get a C minus from me. The only reason being is because they struggled against Illinois, and then they somehow or another allowed 16 points against Kent State. Really like that West Virginia win though. Maybe I'd give them a C plus, but I don't give anything better than a C or a B minus, C plus. I don't know, against teams that allow 66 points. I don't care who you're playing. All right, up next. What are we at? 23 minutes? Oh man, we need to wrap this up soon. Michigan State. I'll go through Michigan State, Michigan, and then just quickly touch on the others. Michigan State's looking good this year, and I've said before in other what are these called, live streams, that Michigan State hasn't played anybody yet. And I'm still kind of holding on to that, but I do have to come clean about something. A couple of weeks ago, possibly even just as recent as 2 weeks ago, possibly even a couple of days ago, I was under the impression that Rutgers was a good team. And I'm still kind of under that impression, but I'm here to now say that I think maybe possibly Rutgers isn't as good as I thought they were. I think that there is something to be said. I'll get to Rutgers in a second. But suffice it to say that I think Michigan State's blowout of Rutgers, 31-13, that's a couple of scores. I think that was a good win. On the road against Rutgers, I do think that was a decent win. I think that they got Rutgers while Rutgers was demoralized. But I think that, you go on the road and you beat a team that was undefeated up until 2 weeks prior to that. It's a decent win. I'll give it to them. That said, they almost lost to Nebraska. Nebraska, I think, is a much better team than their record allows, or record says. Other than that, they've got wins against Northwestern, Youngstown State, meh, and then Western Kentucky, who doesn't have a defense against anybody. So for Michigan State, so far I'm going to give them a very cautiously optimistic B, maybe pushing a B+, because they did beat Miami on the road while Miami was ranked. But obviously we know Miami is absolute trash now. So, weird season for them. It'll be interesting to see how they do moving forward. Michigan, another one of the surprises out of the Big Ten East, currently first in the Big Ten East. Started off the season very strong, 47-14 against Western Michigan. Followed that up with a dominating victory over their Pac-12 foe, Washington. Followed that up with a dominating 63-10 win over Northern Illinois. And then struggled against Rutgers. Now, what did I just say? I just said up until a couple days ago, I thought Rutgers was a good team. So why did Michigan struggle against Rutgers? Because this was the first ranked team that Rutgers had played. Because this was the first big test for Rutgers. And Rutgers comes into this game, and they say, we're here in the Big Ten, we belong here, and we're going to show you that we belong here. So what happens to someone when they come into a situation and they have a lot of confidence and they want to show you that they belong here in this conference, and then they come into your house and they hit you with everything that they've got, and they come this close to beating you? They come back, they score 10 unanswered points rather. They hold your offense, which has been putting up obnoxiously large numbers against other defenses, to 20 points, 0 in the second half. They throw everything they can at you, and it still comes up short. Would that maybe break a team's resolve? Would you maybe be possibly just a little bit demoralized, for lack of a better word, down, sad, something? Would you be upset after that? I think you would be. I think that Rutgers gave Michigan everything that Rutgers had and still couldn't beat them. And I think that there are humans that play on both sides of the ball, and humans capable of really, really great things when they feel like they have something worth moving towards. When Rutgers was undefeated and felt like they had everything in front of them, I think that they chased that with reckless ambition. And they chased it with everything that they could. They gave everything that they had. They left it all on the field, heroically, I might add. But it still wasn't enough. I think that's enough to break a team's resolve. And I'll touch on that again when I get to Rutgers. Not long, though. But then after that, Michigan beat Wisconsin 38-17, a game that everyone said they were going to lose because they struggled against Rutgers. And then they went to Nebraska and won a thrilling 32-29 game over Nebraska. Nebraska is, as I've said multiple times to this point, a lot better than their 3-4 record suggests that they are. And the fact that Nebraska actually got the lead and then Michigan came back and took it back from them and won the game says something about Michigan's culture this time around. I think Cade McNamara hit the nail on the head when he said that there was no disrespect, which I love about Cade. No disrespect meant, but past Michigan teams would not win that game after going down in the fourth quarter like they did. And I think he's absolutely right. I think that there's something very, very different about this Michigan team. I think that this Michigan team is the type of team that they might take a loss before they hit Ohio State, whether that's Michigan State or Penn State. I don't know. I'm inclined to think it's going to be Penn State, but we don't know. I think that they're the type of team that they're still going to fight even with just one loss, because this is a conference that you can still be relevant even with just one loss. Because Penn State's already got a loss. So who knows? Michigan's getting a very optimistic A- from me. Just a couple of things that I think they need to clean up on offense in terms of they've been really good in terms of turnovers and stuff like that. Just want to see them hit more of those open passes. I think Cade McNamara is a phenomenal quarterback. I think that there's just some things that he can do to take that next step. So A- for my Wolverines. Minnesota Golden Gophers get a D. Not going to talk about them. We all saw them during Ohio State, and then we all saw them play Miami. So, no, not going to talk about them. They get a D. They get an F. That's what they get. You lose to Miami of Ohio after being favored 50 points, you get an F. That's what you get. You get nothing else. You get an F. Where's PJ Fleck going to go after this? This is what I said when PJ Fleck first took that job back in 2017 after going to the Cotton Bowl against Wisconsin. When he was still head coach of Western Michigan, I was afraid after that game that he would go, or that someone would hire him away. When Minnesota was the one that hired him away, though, I laughed. I did. I said he's going to be there for, I think I said like 3 to 5 years, and then he's going to get fired, and he's never going to coach again. I have no idea if he's going to coach again after Minnesota, but what I can tell you is that if he has the rest of the season go the way I think it's going to go, which is not good, he's going to get fired within 1, 2, 3 more seasons. I'm inclined to think that he gets one more season after this. If that season's not any good, they're done, which is very sad because he's a very talented coach. But Minnesota is a dumpster fire. They've been a dumpster fire. Jerry Kill said they were a dumpster fire. Clay, I can't remember his first name, but Coach Clay said that they were a dumpster fire. Minnesota Golden Gophers, that is where coaches go to stop coaching. That is where coaching careers go to die. Minnesota gets an F from me. Nebraska, my heart bleeds for Scott Frost. I very much hope. Happy F Day. Yeah, happy F Day to you. F in the chat for Minnesota. I still don't know what F means. I have no idea what that means. My heart bleeds for Scott Frost at Nebraska. My heart bleeds for Adrian Martinez. I know how badly they wanted that game. I know they felt that is a team that has taken so many heartbreaking losses this season already and still came back against the number 9 team in the nation. The crowd was behind them. It was a night game. There was no reason why Nebraska couldn't. No, I shouldn't say that. There were a lot of reasons. Michigan's good. There was a lot. Excuse me. There was a lot propelling Nebraska to a victory that night, and it did not look good in the first half. So this is a team that came back against the number 9 team in the nation, and punched them in the mouth hard. Took the lead, and on the last offensive play of the game for Nebraska, fumbled it away. No, sorry, not the last offensive play of the game. That's my bad. But late in the fourth quarter with a chance to win it, fumbled the ball. Now, there's a question as to whether or not forward progress was stopped and maybe the refs should have blown the whistle. I don't know. I've seen Adrian Martinez break tackles and then get mad when the ref blows the whistle. So that's kind of a question that you got to leave it up to discretion. I'm inclined to believe that it's better to wait until the runner is either being held back by all 11 players on the defense or his knee hits the ground, something like that. I'm always on the side of let them play. But I think that that just adds to the heartbreak. I think that there are probably some Cornhusker fans out there. Everything that I've seen from Cornhusker Nation, absolutely wonderful fan base, by the way. Everything that they've posted on YouTube of Michigan Nebraska highlight videos has been, congrats to Michigan. They played really well. Really wish we could have gotten the win, but best of luck the rest of the season, stuff like that. So they're not harboring any ill will. But I've seen Michigan fans, I've seen Michigan State fans in the comments section, Michigan fans on their own videos saying Michigan is a trash team. They only won that because the refs let them play when he was clearly stopped by forward momentum. You can argue semantics. You can argue opinion pieces, subjective arguments, all you want. But at the end of the day, the play was called the way that it was called. And at the end of the day, was it Dax Hill? Michigan got the fumble, got the lucky break that they needed. Not necessarily lucky because you saw the defender was punching the ball out of his hand. That was practiced. That was intentional. Michigan was not going to be denied, which is what they said. But, I mean, in the end, Nebraska still comes up short because of self-inflicted wounds. Or just wounds in general. I mean, as soon as the guy was punching at the ball, Martinez should have just dropped to his knees. He had the first down. He should have done that. But that doesn't take away at all from the way he played. Good Lord, the guy was amazing. He was amazing. So Nebraska is getting a C- from me, and I wish it were higher, but you got to look at those wins and losses. And you got to look at the fact that the losses are because of self-inflicted wounds. That said, Nebraska, you would be stupid to fire Scott Frost after this season. You are this close. Hold on to him. Northwestern gets an F. Nah, they get a D because at least they didn't lose to a MAC team. Or did they? Hold on. They lost to MSU. They beat Indiana State, whatever. They lost to Duke. Well, it's not a MAC team. Yeah, all right. They get a D. So good job to Northwestern. Pat Fitzgerald. I mean, I've said it before, Northwestern is like a every 3 years kind of a team. After that third or fourth year where they have a really good year, they then just fall off the map. So last year was that third or fourth year, and now this year they suck. Next year they'll probably be better, not necessarily bowl eligible, but then that third or fourth year they're going to be back in the conversation for the Big Ten championship and probably go. Ohio State's getting a B+ from me. Nah, they'll get an A. Maybe an A-. Hold on, let me look at their record real quick. I got to remember who they played. They beat Minnesota. That doesn't matter. Minnesota has an F. They lost to Oregon. Oregon has been struggling, but they still have some wins. They beat Tulsa. Who cares? They beat Akron. Who cares? They beat Rutgers. While I thought Rutgers was good, so I'll give them that. And then they trashed Maryland. So I think the biggest thing is that Ohio State's offense is finally figuring some stuff out, which I think is a funny thing to say, considering that the worst amount of points or the least amount of points they put up this season is 28. I love how Ohio State puts up 28 points in a game, and everybody's just like, oh my gosh, what is going on with Ohio State's offense? They suck. It's like, no, they don't. They just had a bad game against Oregon. I don't know, whatever. Akron, 59. Rutgers, 52. Maryland, 66. Yeah, so the offense is putting up some solid numbers. CJ Stroud is an amazing quarterback. He's made some stupid mistakes. But as he hits his stride, so too I think will Ohio State. They've got a bye week this week. Ohio State's getting an A- from me. Yeah, Ohio State's getting an A. Let's give them an A. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. They get an A from me. Penn State is getting a, let's see, they beat Wisconsin. Wisconsin's not very good. They beat Ball State, which is a MAC team. Always got to beat the MAC. They beat Auburn. Auburn's not very good. They beat Villanova. It's Villanova. Who cares? They trounced Indiana, rather. And then they lost a close game to Iowa in the fourth quarter. So I'm going to give Penn State a B+. And the reason for that is because 28-20 during a whiteout against Auburn, I don't think is extraordinarily impressive. I don't. Just given the fact that Auburn, let's see real quick. Auburn is 4-2 with losses against, well, they lost to Georgia, which makes sense. But they had a close game at LSU, which I think that shouldn't be close. LSU's terrible. Georgia State, they only beat them by 10 points. And then the other two games are Akron and, what is this, Alcorn State? Alabama State? I think Alabama State. We'll just go with Alabama State. Which are, whatever. So I'm giving Penn State a B+, just because their best win is against a very, very bad team. Not a very, very bad team, but a not all that great team. I would say that the win against Wisconsin's pretty good, but now Wisconsin's losing to everybody after blowouts against Notre Dame and Michigan. So, it was the first game of the season. Maybe Penn State's just not hitting their stride yet in terms of offense, but I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But for right now, they get a solid B+, optimistic B+ from me. Purdue, I give a D. I don't think Purdue's very good. They're 3-2 right now. That's fine. Close game against Notre Dame. Close game against Minnesota, though. And Minnesota, as we all know, is trash because they lost to a really bad MAC team. Can't lose to the MAC. This next game they've got against Iowa, I expect that to be a blowout in favor of Iowa. So Purdue's getting a D from me. Taking a sip. Oh, crap. We're at 40 minutes. All right. Real quick, I'm just going to touch on Wisconsin, who's 1-3, 1-4 now, or 2-3. 2-3. They blew out Illinois 24-0. Good win. But like I said, blowout losses to Michigan and Notre Dame. Interested to see how Graham Mertz is going to do the rest of the season. I can't remember if he played. Did he play against Illinois? Not entirely sure. They did just announce that they have dismissed running back Jalen Berger from the program. Not entirely sure what that's all about. He was just a redshirt freshman, and it looks like he had 4 receptions for 30 yards against Illinois. There was no specified reason, so maybe something's going on with the program. Who knows? But yeah, so Wisconsin, I'm not very impressed by them. That said, their defense is still really good, and most of the points that Notre Dame scored against Wisconsin in the fourth quarter, I think, were turnovers off of turnovers, pick sixes, if I'm not mistaken. So, I mean, that doesn't say much. Or that what that says is that their defense is still pretty good. Which, I think if you look at the score against Illinois, 0 points allowed. Obviously there's still some sort of life in there. It'll be interesting to see what they do against Army, because Army has been scaring some Big Ten teams lately. Army scares a lot of people lately. But all in all, I would give them a B-, C+. I would err on the side of C+. I think if Graham Mertz doesn't throw those pick sixes against Notre Dame, maybe it's a different question. But 41-13 is the final. That's unacceptable. And then 38-17 against Michigan. This is why I think Michigan is really good, is because when Michigan played Wisconsin, Wisconsin had the number 2 defense in the nation, or maybe number 1 against the run, I think it was, and then number 2 otherwise. Can't really remember. But they were good, and Michigan still beat them 38-17. And Wisconsin didn't even turn the ball over that many times. I think there were 2 turnovers in the game against Wisconsin. So there you go. C+ for Wisconsin. Last but not least, certainly not least, Rutgers. So up until a couple of days ago, possibly even Saturday, I thought Rutgers was a really good team. I thought Rutgers was on the verge of being a top 25 team. But alas, here we are. It is Wednesday, October 13th, 2021, and Rutgers is 3-3. Now, if you looked at the things that I was posting in comment section on YouTube videos, you would have seen me ferociously defend Rutgers as a very good team. I think they could have been. What I said earlier in this show was that they gave all they had against Michigan and had nothing left, and then had to play Ohio State the following week. That's going to tear up any team. Michigan State is one of the surprises coming out of the Big Ten. If they gave all they had against Michigan and still lost, and then had to follow that up with Ohio State, they would have gotten blown out. What I'm trying to say is that Rutgers, I think, is a good team. Maybe not as good as I thought they were, but I think that they just have nothing left. I think that they gave everything they had against Michigan. It still wasn't enough. And then they didn't have anything for Ohio State, and they would have needed more to beat Ohio State. Because they're already dealing with heartbreak at that point, and then they're coming up against an offense that's hitting its stride. So what are you going to do? And then they have to follow that up with Michigan State, who basically lives or dies by the 80-yard running play by Kenneth Walker. Excuse me. And Rutgers gives up big plays. So I think that Rutgers, if they hadn't had Michigan, Ohio State, and Michigan State, 3 of the 4 best teams in the East, back to back to back, maybe this is a different story. Maybe they play Michigan and then they play Illinois, and all of a sudden they're 4-1 and on the verge of bowl eligibility. And then they follow that up with a loss against Ohio State, but there's still plenty of time to get that bowl game, right? So then they play Indiana. They beat Indiana. All of a sudden, they're 5-2. Okay. Then they have to play Michigan State, but they're 5-2. They're on the verge of bowl eligibility. They want to prove that they belong in this conference. And at 5-2, they're already above average in the Big Ten at that point, because otherwise you're looking at Northwestern, who's awful, Indiana 2-3. And then Maryland, who I think is 4-2 right now. At 5-2, it would have been a different story. Now, obviously, this would have been a couple of weeks down the road. Maryland probably has a couple more wins under their belt. I don't know. But they would have beaten Illinois. Illinois would have been, I think at that point, ineligible for bowl, guaranteed at that point. They would have had too many losses. But I think basically what I'm trying to say is that this is a different story at that point. Yeah, this would be a different story at that point. Unfortunately, though, they played Michigan, Ohio State, and Michigan State back to back to back, and you just can't do that. Which is why I think that they'll have a good moral victory against Northern Illinois. They only have to win 3 more games. They've got Northwestern, and then Illinois, and then they have to play Wisconsin. That could be interesting. Let's say Rutgers is 5-3, Wisconsin is 5-3. That could be interesting. That Wisconsin game, maybe they get bowl eligible against Wisconsin, and then they go at Indiana. Indiana's not doing very good, and Indiana's about to give everything they've got against Michigan State. So who knows? But then they've got Penn State on the road. So they get bowl eligible against Wisconsin. They tie that off with a nice victory against Indiana. They go, 7-2 at that point? It was 3-3, 4-3, 5-3, 6-3, 7-3. They hit Penn State. They go 7-4, and then they come home for Maryland. That's a toss-up. Could be 8-4, could be 7-5. I don't know. But the point is that I still think that Rutgers gets bowl eligible this year, which I think should still make them a relatively decent team at 8-4, 7-5. Yeah. So that is it for the midseason grades. I didn't actually plan on doing midseason grades until I started streaming, so I probably should have figured that out before. We're running a little low on time. We'll get out of here in about... my goal is 10 minutes. All right, so I do not have my score predictions yet. Oh my goodness. Why? I'll tell you why. Because I'm going to do them live. Boom. Let's see. All right, and I am going to transition to, order, move to top. Oh, crap, no. Oh, there we go. Okay, I did it wrong. All right, I'm boomering this. Boomering. Yeah, whatever. Anyway, yeah, there we go. Transition. Boom. There we go. Now you guys can see my screen, and we're looking at the Team Ravelry homepage. So, yeah. Let's get into some picks. All right, so first off, we've got Michigan State versus Indiana. Now, as I said just a minute ago, Indiana's going to give everything they have against Michigan State because this is basically Indiana's last chance to do anything meaningful. In this conference, I think it's still an accomplishment to go 9-3. Unfortunately, Indiana has had some losses against some teams that aren't very good. So let's pull this up real quick. Yeah, Michigan State playing Indiana. There it is. So the line right now is Michigan State by 4.5. Now, if I were a betting man and I just watched that Rutgers game, I would be like, okay, Michigan State's probably going to win by more than 4.5. That said, I'm hearing some interesting things from pundits saying things like, I don't know. I think actually Michigan State could win, or Indiana could win. Wow. So let's real quick look at the last 5. Indiana, Penn State, 24-0. Not very good. Indiana beat Western Kentucky 33-31. Well, actually, we look at Michigan State beat Western Kentucky 48-31. The only difference is that Indiana went to Western Kentucky, but I don't care. Western Kentucky's Western Kentucky. They led Cincinnati at one point during that game by 2 scores. That's good. They trounced Idaho 56-14, but it's Idaho. So looking at the last 5 for both Michigan State and Indiana, I think you can look at Michigan State's record and say that it's probably that their wins are better than Indiana's wins and close losses. Because Indiana has losses against teams that are now in the top 5. Iowa is now currently number 2. Cincinnati, I think, is 4 or 5. And then Penn State is in the top 6 or 7 as well. So Indiana, and they didn't do anything against those top, except for Cincinnati, against those top 5 teams. So they didn't do anything against Iowa. They didn't do anything against Penn State. What are they going to do against Michigan State? Well, this is kind of the interesting thing then. So is Indiana better than their 2-3 record? Maybe, but we have nothing that says that they are just yet, because they're playing teams that are so far out of their league that we don't know anything. Now, the other thing is, too, they're playing teams that are that far out of their league, so do they have anything left? Do they have any juice left? I mean, if you're getting pounded by Iowa, Cincinnati comes back to break your heart, and then you get trounced at Penn State because Penn State doesn't really like you for the fact that you beat them last year on a controversial 2-point conversion play, which arguably derailed Penn State's entire 2020 campaign until they played Michigan, of course. At this point, Indiana, the question is then, does Indiana have anything left? And so that's the question coming up against Michigan State. So then the question for Michigan State is, are they as good as we think they are? Now, I think that they're actually pretty decent. I don't necessarily like who they've beaten, although I think that the fact that they're undefeated should obviously say something for the way this team is playing. They're beating teams, and they're beating several of them quite soundly. You can't look away from that Miami game, although Miami's trash. I just said that. The point is that they're doing what they need to do as a good team against the bad teams. Is Indiana an actual bad team, or are they a mid-level to, maybe above average team that's getting pounded by these elite teams, by these top 6-7 teams? On the one hand, I would say maybe they are above average then. On the other hand, I would say that they're currently allowing 28.2 points per game, and one of those games was against Western Kentucky, who scored 31 points on them. Now, Western Kentucky also scored 31 points against Michigan State, but Indiana only scored 33 in response. Michigan State scored 48. I think Michigan State currently has the better offense. In terms of defense, I think Michigan State also has the better defense. In terms of, is Indiana going to play with reckless abandon and win the game? I don't know. I'm inclined to think that they could, but for right now, I've bet against Michigan State, I think the last 3 or 4 weeks, and they've come back to bite me in the butt every game. So for right now, I'm taking Michigan State over Indiana. We'll call it 38-28. So I don't have my picks in just yet, so that's why I'm doing these live. And who do we have up next? All right, Nebraska and Minnesota. Not going to spend a ton of time on this. As I said, my heart bleeds for Scott Frost. Real quick, actually, this is the 62nd meeting between Nebraska and Minnesota. Also, I should mention, these stats come to us courtesy of teamrivalry.com, where you can find all sorts of stats and every single Big Ten team, every single game that every current Big Ten team has ever played. We have stats going all the way back into the late 1800s. It's really awesome. It's really, really awesome, actually. You can look back during like World War II times and see who, Minnesota and Nebraska played. But for right now, we're looking at, so like PJ Fleck's record at Minnesota is 27-21. That's abysmal. Against Nebraska, though, he's 3-1. He hasn't played this Nebraska team, though. Minnesota currently 3-2, 1-1 in the Big Ten. Nebraska, an unfortunate 3-4, 1-3 in the Big Ten. Interesting game. I personally think that Nebraska is going to win this game because I think that Scott Frost is at the point now where he's looking at the rest of this season as a precursor to next season. Because that's a thing. I mean, if Nebraska ends the season 8-4, that's momentum. I don't remember exactly who Nebraska plays the rest of the season, but if they end the season 8-4, that's momentum into 2022. That's huge. Not only then does Scott Frost keep his job, but that helps recruiting. That's another year of practice, of building things up. I can't remember if Adrian Martinez is a senior or not, but if he's got him back, that's even better. That's huge. That's huge going into 2022. I think Scott Frost is going to look at his team and he's going to say, look, we beat Minnesota. If we beat everyone else 1 week at a time, Minnesota is the type of team that you can play against. They're good enough to offer some what's it called? They're good enough to offer some pushback, but they're bad enough that you can learn from your mistakes and still probably beat them. And that's why I think Nebraska is going to win this game. I think that right now, let's see, Minnesota gives up about 20 points a game. Nebraska scores 32 points a game. Minnesota only scores 24. So I'm gonna take Nebraska to win. I'm gonna take Nebraska to cover. I'm gonna call it Nebraska. I'm gonna call it 31-24. That seems right to me. Yeah, I'm going to call Nebraska 31 to Minnesota's 24. Okay. Moving right along. Rutgers and Northwestern, not going to spend too much time on this. Rutgers currently favored by 2. Vegas, I think you might be drunk. No offense to Northwestern. You guys know how much I love Pat Fitzgerald. Oh, wait, no, you don't. I really like Pat Fitzgerald at Northwestern. I think he's fun. I think he's a really good coach. And like I said, every 3 years, Northwestern does something. That said, Northwestern lost to Duke. They beat Indiana State, whatever. They beat Ohio, not Ohio State. Boy, wouldn't that be a trip. But then they lost to Nebraska. Nebraska's really good or better than their record, whatever. Yeah, I think the fact that this is at Northwestern is kind of interesting. But I guess this is the question for Greg Schiano and Rutgers. If they have anything left in the tank. Greg Schiano is kind of already in the same position as Scott Frost at Nebraska. Just a couple of years earlier. What is this, like the second year of Greg Schiano at Rutgers? I think when he came back. This is either I think it is. So he's already in the situation where he's telling his team, like, look, if we go 9-3, if we do something the rest of the season, or the 7-5, 8-4 situation that I laid out a few minutes ago, that's momentum carrying into next season. If they lose to Northwestern this game, they're done. I think Pat Fitzgerald can afford another loss here because I don't think that his job is really ever on the hot seat or is ever in question. I think Pat Fitzgerald has established himself as you build for 3 years and then you almost make it, or you almost win the Big Ten, and then you build for 3 years and then you almost win the Big Ten. For Northwestern right now, that's enough. They're happy with that, and that's fine. If you were at anywhere else, Michigan, Ohio State, he would have been gone a long time ago. But I'm really happy for how content the Wildcats are with Pat Fitzgerald. And frankly, I love having him in the Big Ten. I think he's an absolute joy to watch coach. But for Rutgers, so this is their 5th meeting, Rutgers and Northwestern. Rutgers is 3-1 against Northwestern. Greg Schiano has not yet played Northwestern. He is 20-22. I believe that takes into account his prior stint. Pat Fitzgerald's record is not phenomenal, but that's fine. It's Northwestern. So some interesting stats here. I'm gonna take Rutgers to be hungry. I'm gonna take them better than that -2 there, Vegas. I don't know what you're doing. I'm gonna take Rutgers to win, and it's gonna be Rutgers, let's say 28-21, I think. All right, we've got just a minute or two left. Purdue and Iowa. Not a lot to say about this. I think this is a pretty clear victory for Iowa. The current spread is Iowa by 11.5. I would take Iowa to win and cover. Purdue, I understand they've had some good games. I think Iowa's just too good right now anyway, and I think Purdue doesn't really have what it needs to challenge in a way that Iowa wouldn't look good against them. Like, I think if it were Nebraska versus Purdue, I think Nebraska would still beat Purdue pretty soundly, or at least, by a good margin. Purdue, I think, has some stuff in place that they could be good. They're just not quite getting there. I mean, their defense is only allowing 13 points a game. They're scoring. Oh, I'm sorry. That's Iowa. Purdue actually is only allowing 15 points a game, but they're only scoring 23. And that's really what it comes down to, is that Purdue, I mean, they lost to Minnesota. They only allowed 20 points. But if they could just get that one more touchdown with a 2-point conversion, they would have won, and they couldn't do it. Illinois, they only put up 13 points. Notre Dame, they put up 13 points. They only allowed 27 against a decent offense, or an offense that's certainly better than theirs, but they could only score 13 points. And that's kind of the point, is that when they come up against relatively decent defenses, which Iowa has, Purdue tends to fold. So right now, I would look at that 11.5 point spread, and I would take Iowa to win and cover. I'm going to take Iowa to win. Let's call it Iowa. I'm going to go a little bit big. Iowa 35 to... No, I think that might be too much. I'm going to go a little conservative. Sorry. Let's go Iowa 30. That seems good. Iowa 30 to Purdue. Let's call it 14. All right, we are officially over an hour, which means this is the longest this show has ever gone. Congratulations if you're watching. If you are watching, throw something in the chat that says that you love watching me talk about football for over an hour. Up next, Army at Wisconsin. An interesting mid-season non-conference game that Wisconsin's going to have to answer some questions. This 14-point spread, though, that has Wisconsin winning, I don't like it. I would not take that. I would take Wisconsin to win, but Army to cover. And the reason is this. Army is scoring 34 points a game, but Wisconsin's scoring 20. Interestingly enough, both teams are allowing 20 points per game. So Wisconsin better be on the lookout here. Now, Army has some blowout victories against Georgia State. They won 43-10. Western Kentucky, there's that Western Kentucky offense putting up 35 points, but Army still beat them 38-35. Then Army beat UConn, or as I like to call them, you can't. I got that from ESPN, I'm sorry. 52-21. And then they beat Miami of Ohio 23-10. So some erratic scores here, but all in all, the offense looking pretty good. Off week against Miami of Ohio, not sure what's up with that. The only question, though, is that they lost to Ball State. Not really sure what happened there, but I'm sure that they'll be upset about that. That was their first and only loss. And then Wisconsin coming hot off of the Illinois 24-0 game. That said, Army has taken some good teams and done terrible things to them. Whether or not that means they beat Wisconsin, I don't know. But if there were ever a year where they could beat Wisconsin, this would probably be that year. That said, I don't think that if Wisconsin wins, it's going to be by 14 points right now. I think that Army's offense is just a little too good. Although I think Wisconsin's defense is also very good, which I've said. So it's kind of an interesting conundrum. It's what's going to happen here. I think that this might be... I think that Army might be a little weak given the opponents that they've played. It's kind of a similar matchup, if you think about it, to the Michigan-Wisconsin game, where Michigan's offense was looking really good and defense was pretty decent, and then came into this game and Michigan destroyed them. I think the only difference is that Army hasn't quite played teams up to the caliber that Michigan has played, although Western Kentucky's offense is really good. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to say Wisconsin's going to win, but I'm going to put Wisconsin down 30-20. The other part of that, too, is if Graham Mertz is even playing or if he gets injured, I don't know. What's going to happen there? Are they going to fall apart or I don't know. Do we have anything left? No, that's it. All right. So the picks are in. Thank you so much for watching. Sorry we went probably 20 minutes over what I said I wanted to do. I don't care. It's fun to talk football. Who cares? Be sure to check out Team Rivalry, teamrivalry.com, where you can find all of the most epic game day stats, everything that you need to enjoy I don't know, college football stats if you like it. There's a lot there, a lot to offer, a lot of interesting information and stuff like that on all of your favorite Big Ten teams. More teams to come in the future. But for right now, happy football. Enjoy week 6 or week 7. I think it's week 7. Yeah, enjoy week 7, everybody. Michigan's on a bye week, so I'm not going to watch anybody. That's not true. But have a good week 7. Have a good weekend. Talk to you next week. Goodbye.